It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10. Our top story, 28 days of horror. The villagers captured, starved and tortured, now preparing to testify in Ukraine's biggest ever war crimes trial.
Look at the size of this cell. No windows, and out of the 19, 9 of them were children.
We hear from children haunted by fears of execution and see new 3D technology being used to collect evidence against Russian soldiers. Also tonight, a grieving family returns to the scene of the crime in Nottingham as a 31-year-old man is charged with murder. In Greece, a tearful reunion, but the United Nations says 500 other migrants are feared dead after their boat capsized. The former boss of the police watchdog is charged with raping a girl aged under 16. A national crisis why the number of children missing school has doubled since the pandemic. Plus, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30. Hello there, a very good evening. They were forced underground as children and emerged after 28 days of horror as adults. Several teenagers and some toddlers are among more than 300 residents of a village in northern Ukraine held captive by Russian forces in a school basement during the early days of the war. Starved, terrified and tortured, they had no air and minimal hygiene. Their evidence will be central to the biggest war crimes trial since Russia invaded, a case which could end up in the International Criminal Court. Sky special correspondent Alex Crawford has had rare access to survivors and prosecutors and sent this exclusive report from Yehidne.
From the bombed-out ruins of their community club, the survivors of one of the most horrifying acts in this war sing in lusty defiance. The villagers of Yehidne are about to be the star witnesses in Ukraine's biggest war crimes trial to date. They fall silent. They're honouring those who didn't make it through the largest single kidnapping carried out by Russian troops during their invasion of the country. The memories of what they've all been through are still searingly raw. In the basement of the village school, Russian soldiers held hostage almost the entire community. Ivan was amongst nearly 400 villagers held captive underground here for nearly a month. The picture taken on their release shows one of the bigger cells, packed full of hostages. They were crammed in like this all the time, starved, terrified and tortured. 368 villagers in all, 69 of them children. They were split up amongst a network of different sized cells with no hygiene, little air and just buckets to go to the toilet in, with all the rooms horribly overcrowded.
They put numbers on the outside of the room. There were 19 in here. And look at the size of this cell. No windows. And out of the 19, 9 of them were children. There was no room to lie down or sleep properly.
No war, the words say. The children drew themselves with unhappy faces amongst hopeful hearts and Ukrainian flags. And there are others showing executions that they feared or witnessed. Few thought they'd get out alive.
It was really scary for the children and grandchildren. It was like a nightmare. I don't know how we got through it.
Russian soldiers set up camp inside the village's only school days after the invasion began. The big sandy scars on the school grounds are where they dug in their military vehicles. Schools, like hospitals, are protected under international law, and hiding inside to launch attacks is considered a war crime. We've been given rare access to what the Ukrainian prosecutors found. Whole military files, a soldier's backpack, phones and SIM cards, as well as commander's orders. They've identified 15 Russian soldiers that they believe violated the international rules of war when they carried out the siege in Yehidne school.
We're trying to prove that this large number of people, more than 360, were kept in the basement of a school and used by the Russian troops as human shields against the Ukrainian forces.
And they're confident they have the physical evidence left behind by the soldiers. There are also hundreds of witnesses who'll testify about the brutal conditions which led to at least 10 of the hostages dying, with their bodies left there, sometimes for days. Some of the children kept underground in the dark amongst the corpses were babies or toddlers. Others, like Marina and Lilia, were young teenagers when they were held captive. We went down there as children, Marina says, and we left as adults with a very different view about everything. Ukrainian forensic investigators showed us the new technological devices which they're hoping will seal a guilty verdict in the courts. They've taken thousands of images, using for the first time in the country a range of 3D scanners to document what happened inside. It's an incredible technological weapon which freezes the crime scene forever, so forensic analysts, lawyers and police can minutely examine and zoom in on every part of the investigation site.
The whole village was a hostage.
It'll also be used by the International Criminal Court to prosecute those responsible. I want to hear the first verdicts this year, Natalia tells us. That's what I want, and it's the wish of millions of Ukrainians too. There's much unresolved anguish over just what happened in Yehidne, and a lot of hope being pinned on the upcoming war crimes trial to avenge everything they went through and those who perished. Alex Crawford, Sky News in Yehidne in northern Ukraine.
Well, as prosecutors prepare their war crimes case in St. Petersburg, a defiant Vladimir Putin warned that Ukraine would soon run out of its own military equipment. He was speaking at a business forum. The Russian president saying Kyiv had no choice but to depend on weaponry from elsewhere and that Western tanks were already burning on the front line. Tomorrow, he'll meet a delegation of African leaders as part of a peace mission. That's after they visited Kyiv, which was being targeted by a volley of missiles described by Ukrainian officials as a greeting from Russia. Back here, a 31-year-old man has been charged with the murders of Grace O'Malley Kumar, Barnaby Webber and Ian Coates in Nottingham. Valdo Calocane will appear in court tomorrow, also accused of 3 counts of attempted murder after attacks across the city in the early hours of Tuesday morning. Lisa Dowd reports.
This family clearly find comfort in being in this city. This is the exact spot in Nottingham where their 19-year-old son, Barnaby Webber, lost his life. As police held traffic back, they laid flowers on the road where he died. 31-year-old Valdo Calocane, of no fixed address, is charged with the murders of Barnaby, fellow student Grace O'Malley Kumar and school caretaker Ian Coates. They were stabbed to death on Tuesday. Calocane also studied in this city. He left the University of Nottingham last summer after graduating from a course in mechanical engineering. He's due to appear before magistrates on Saturday. Calocane's family vicar in West Wales said his thoughts were with the victims.
It was overwhelming to think that lives have just been cut down like that, so horrifically. And so our hearts went out to the victims and we were praying for them.
The 3 victims, who all loved sport, were remembered on day 1 of the Ashes. The biggest day in cricket started with a moment's silence. And to commemorate Barnaby and Grace, both talented cricketers, during the 56th over, the number on Barnaby's cricket shirt, Amazing Grace, was played from the stands. In Nottingham's Market Square, the mass of flowers just grows.
Innocent people, I just think it's so cruel and so harsh.
I don't even know what to say, really. Yeah, but I thought I should come and also be part of the community mourning.
Also on people's minds here are the 3 others who were run over during these attacks. 2 are in a stable condition and 1 has been discharged from hospital. Calocane is also charged with their attempted murders. This week has ended 3 lives and changed countless others here. It is the week this city will never forget. Lisa Dowd, Sky News, Nottingham.
The United Nations says 500 people are missing after an overcrowded fishing boat carrying migrants capsized in the Mediterranean Sea. So far, no women or children have been rescued. It's feared they were trapped on the lower deck when the boat sank. Sky News has heard the harrowing account of one man who described swimming to safety through water filled with bodies. Well, the ship reportedly set off for Italy from the Libyan port city of Tobruk around a week ago. It sank in the early hours of Wednesday morning, leading to questions for the Greek Coast Guard, who's changed their account of the tragedy. Our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, reports from Kalamata, where the survivors were brought to shore.
There's been little, if any, good news for 3 days. But this morning, a man who'd flown to Greece to search for his relative found him alive. But there are still so many missing, as many as 500 the United Nations estimates, and everyone is looking for someone. We've been told stories of passengers drinking their own urine and sucking liquid from melting refrigerators on board because water ran out early into the crossing. Greek social workers say they've heard horrific accounts from some of the survivors they've been looking after.
While visiting the hospital yesterday, the story that shocked me the most, at least from the hospital, was that of a man describing to us how he managed to be rescued from the boat. He said that for 2 hours he was swimming among the bodies of children.
There is now a focus on the Greek Coast Guard and questions about their actions on the night. People are starting to ask why they didn't intervene when it was obvious that the boat was dangerously overcrowded. There were migrants on board, and therefore almost certainly people smugglers too. At first, the Coast Guard said that they hadn't thrown a rope to the boat. Now they admit that they did. A local lawyer says the authorities might have questions to answer.
The ship is obviously in danger. There are just too many refugees on board, which is something that is obvious to those in charge. But despite that, they throw food and water instead of throwing life jackets, rescue vessels, rescue boats.
The search operation is now entering its final hours. They found nothing and no one since Wednesday morning. This is the warehouse in the port of Kalamata where they brought the survivors, looked after them, gave them food and water. But they've now all gone. They've been bussed to an immigration processing centre elsewhere in central Greece. And so this is now empty, and I think, significantly, the aid agencies have also left. They are not expecting to receive any more survivors. Sky News filmed these pictures of migrants waiting to cross to Europe from the Libyan port of Tobruk this week. It's become a major hub for smuggling operations, and it's the same port that the boat left from before its fateful end off the coast of Greece. 9 Egyptians have been arrested by Greek authorities on suspicion of people smuggling. They'll appear in court on Monday. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News, in southern Greece.
The former head of the police watchdog, which investigates officers' conduct, has been charged with raping a child. Michael Lockwood has strenuously denied the allegations. Sharman Freeman-Powell is here with me. These allegations date back a few decades.
Yes, that's right. So it's 9 offences, that's 6 counts of indecent assault and 3 counts of rape. And it dates back to October 1985 through to March 1986. So almost 40 years ago, and the now 64-year-old Michael Lockwood would have been in his 20s, and he's been alleged to have raped a child under the age of 16. And as you say, this is a man that was the former head of the Independent Office for Police Conduct, who's now facing some very serious allegations himself. But it is important to stress that his lawyers have said that he strenuously denies all of the allegations facing him, and that he will be strongly defending himself while still cooperating with proceedings, and he is due to appear at the Magistrates' Court in Hull on June the 28th.
OK, Sharman, thank you. A truck driver has been found guilty of killing 11 people at a synagogue in Pittsburgh in 2018. Jurors must now decide whether Robert Bowers will be sentenced to life in prison without parole or be sentenced to death. That deliberation is expected to take several weeks. The boss of Tesco says there are encouraging signs that inflation is starting to ease as he hit back at critics who've blamed supermarkets for high food prices. The Bank of England, some politicians and unions have all accused the grocery sector of profiteering, but Tesco Chief Executive Ken Murphy says they've already seen reductions in the price of milk, bread and pasta. Boris Johnson has committed a fresh breach of the ministerial code with his new role as a columnist for the Daily Mail. The Advisory Committee on Business Appointments says the former Prime Minister only told them of the appointment half an hour before making the news public. Charlie is 13 years old. Each morning, his nan places his uniform at the end of his bed. And each morning, Charlie refuses to get dressed. He is one of more than 100,000 children missing school regularly each year, a number which has doubled since the pandemic. Our People and Politics correspondent Nick Martin reports now on what's being described as a national crisis.
13-year-old Charlie has spent just a handful of days in school in the last 3 years. And often, the school run ends like this.
Right, come on then. Let's go. Charlie, don't start this. Charlie, you serious? Don't get upset, come on.
No, man. Go suck, because I can't do anything.
You can do it.
What we witness takes us to the heart of a national crisis of school attendance, fuelled by the pandemic. Charlie's bright. He's got lots of friends, and reports suggest when he's in school, he works hard and behaves, but he still refuses to go.
Every morning, my nan comes in and she tries to get me up. I'm like, nope, not doing it. And then she keeps getting mad at me, and then she keeps coming in and saying, Charlie, get your clothes on. I'm saying, nope.
What is it about school that you're not keen on?
The people, the teachers, the classes, the uniform.
Charlie's school have offered a reduced timetable and learning in isolation, but it doesn't seem to have worked.
We've dragged him in the car, crying. Dad's even lifted him out of a van at one point to put him in the gate, and he just lost his rag and ended up punching a wall.
You know, Charlie's not alone. There are thousands and thousands of children, just like him, missing chunks of their education.
The numbers are staggering. In the first term of this academic year, more than 125,000 pupils, just like Charlie, spent more time out of class than in it. That's doubled since the pandemic. We've been given rare access to a special team whose job it is to get children back to class after the school lockdowns during the pandemic.
I've worked for the council in this area for 23 years now, and this is literally the busiest we've ever been. Being shut in your home for nearly years and then trying to get back out again and get back into the systems they were in historically, it's a massive change of habit that. There was lost social skills, there was loss of confidence, there's some anxiety, and some of it has crept beyond anxiety into mental health issues.
Charlie shares a love of boxing with his dad, James, who says he's tried everything to get his son into school. But he's frustrated too at what he sees as a rigid curriculum that fails to inspire his son.
It's the way he looks at it, he's doing lessons that he doesn't need for his future plans.
Do you agree with that?
I do agree with that. I think people should be pushed really into what they really want to do, not just sitting down doing science or stuff that they don't need for the future.
But James has already been fined thousands of pounds for Charlie's absence, and he says the next time it could be much worse.
I think the next step was behind bars, from what I've been told.
Prison?
Yeah.
And how do you feel about that?
Well, if it means he's not hurting himself and stuff like that, I'd rather do that all day long, to be fair.
What, so James, you'd actually rather go to prison
Than seeing my son
than see
upset.
your son going to school?
Yeah, to see my son, that's not going to school, is it? It's upset.
No, but the actual mechanics of it is, isn't it?
The physical trauma that he goes through and the mental trauma that he goes through, then, yeah, my son's obviously without question.
Obviously, no one wants their dad in prison just because they ain't going to school. That's stupid. But I dislike school so much that if my dad did go to prison, I'd still refuse because of how much I dislike it.
The government says it's committed to getting children like Charlie back to school by rolling out what it calls attendance hubs with mentors to help children in the worst affected areas. But it seems far from getting the numbers back to pre-pandemic levels. Charlie's day ends with him not going to school. His story, though, offers a snapshot into the lives of thousands of other children struggling with the very concept of school, falling behind on their education as each day passes. Nick Martin, Sky News, Blackpool.
The US Justice Department has found that Minneapolis police repeatedly discriminated against black people and Native Americans. The findings of a 2-year civil rights investigation, which was prompted by the killing of George Floyd, claimed systemic problems made his death possible.
We found that MPD and the city of Minneapolis engages in a pattern or practice of using excessive force, unlawfully discriminating against black and Native American people in enforcement activities, violating the rights of people engaged in protected speech, and discriminating against people with behavioral disabilities.
A hosepipe ban will be introduced in Kent and Sussex in 10 days' time due to high demand for drinking water. Some residents across the region have been left with little or no water, forcing schools to close. South East Water said demand was at record levels. And the runs flowed for England on day one of the Ashes. Joe Root made 118 in England's total of 393 for 8 declared. Australia closed on 14 without loss. For years, they were the objects of teenage obsession. Fast forward 30 years and take that, and their fans have, of course, grown up. But the nostalgia inspired by the music has never waned. In fact, it's now being played out on screen, as our arts and entertainment correspondent Katie Spencer reports.
One of the biggest boy bands of the 90s. Still going, but 5 are now 3.
Tighten your bra straps, girls.
This is the next incarnation of Take That, a film.
I mean, as a Take That fan, it's the greatest day of my life being here. Join in if you know the words.
But with female friendship the focus, sadly, someone had to break the news to Gary that he wasn't going to have a new career in acting with this.
A huge blunder, in my opinion. But anyway, we go on.
Rachel, are you still... I'm their biggest fan in the whole entire world, Steve.
Instead, comedian Aisling Bea plays a competition winner who bags 4 tickets to see her teenage crushes perform for a concert in Athens.
I've come a long way.
Come a long way, but we're not too sure where you've been.
Okay, thanks. Can we just do 7 minutes worth?
Yeah,
of
I think we can.
Karaoke.
We have it in us now. We are fully ready
and raring. Was it sort of gloriously good fun for you guys to be in the streets and performing some of these?
They're long days. Never forget, we did a conga 30 times down the road. That scene took 2 or 3 days of rehearsals. Yeah. So we hope it looks easy, but it never actually is behind the scenes. You know?
From fantasies of marrying the boys through to the ritual recording of Top of the Pops, it's certainly a Mamma Mia-esque nostalgia trip.
Did you witness some sights in the 90s?
Yeah, unfortunately, they're not very, I can't really mention them on camera,
Within a year, we were travelling around to all these crazy countries, just having the time of our lives. And that's how it felt. That's how I remember the 90s being. I remember being, just noise, chaos, screaming. It was just terrific.
It was a crazy time. But the experiences I've had through the band have been incredible. Now I'm here.
Got a film now.
Spotting how and where the band make a very brief cameo is the challenge. in a feel-good movie that celebrates all the joy and awkwardness of teenage obsession in the 90s. Katie Spencer, Sky News.
I think Katie might be a bit of a fan, don't you? And that was Sky News at 10. Now, coming up shortly, before King Charles's first Trooping the Colour since his coronation, find out which community champions and British greats have been recognised in his birthday honours list. I'll tell you about that in a few minutes. And, of course, also coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's papers. That's in the press preview, including this story. It's on the front of tomorrow's Guardian. The headline, Tory time bomb as millions face surge in mortgage rates. There it is. And tonight I'll be joined by The Guardian columnist Zoe Williams and also former Conservative MP turned Chief Executive of the charity Business in the Community, Mary McLeod. Don't go away. Hello again, you're watching Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what is on tomorrow's front pages. But first, our top stories. Sky News has had rare access to Ukrainian prosecutors preparing for the country's biggest war crimes trial after hundreds of villagers were kept underground and used as human shields by Russian forces. Police investigating the Nottingham attacks have charged a 31-year-old man with 3 counts of murder and 3 counts of attempted murder. And the UN says it believes as many as 500 people may still be missing after a boat carrying migrants sank off the coast of Greece. So we've got the press preview for you in a moment, but first they are the community champions and the best of British, honoured by the King in his first birthday honours since his coronation. Among them, an internationally renowned magazine editor, a campaigning dancer, and one woman who lost 3 members of her family to violence. Our royal correspondent, Laura Bundock, has been meeting some of the honorees.
Who gets gongs? After the blasting of Boris Johnson's resignation honours, perhaps here a less contentious lineup.
That's lovely, fantastic.
Recognised and rewarded in the King's first birthday honours. Suzanne Richards, now MBE. She lost her son Joel, her brother and her father in the 2015 Tunisian terror attack. And she set up a charity to help others bereaved by murder or terrorism.
Never in a world of Sundays did I ever think I'd get anything like this. But it is bittersweet. You know, there's a reason why I've received this.
Suzanne is already poised to help the families of last week's Nottingham killings.
Just knowing what what those families are going through, and it's just horrific. There's such a mirror image of what happened. They were 19, Joel was 19, student university, so was Joel. So yeah, but we will be here to support them.
At 18, Junior Frood is the youngest on the list, awarded a British Empire Medal. The young dancer making moves to beat bullying with his hashtag #BoysCanDance.
It means so much. It just shows all the hard work that I do is being noticed and my voice is being heard and people are hearing me, and it just feels so crazy that I'm the youngest. It's so crazy, and I'm so honoured to receive this award.
Also on the list, Dame Anna Wintour, the Vogue editor-in-chief, awarded a Companion of Honour, as are the author Sir Ian McEwan and Professor Sir John Bell, who played a prominent role in the pandemic. There are MBEs for Davina McCall and the actor Vicky McClure, who's campaigned about dementia. And an MBE too for the footballer, now pundit, Ian Wright, for his services to charity and sport. This year's list a continuation of the coronation theme of helping out and service.
The King doesn't choose who gets honoured, but it is part of his first official birthday celebrations, including his first trooping the colour as King. He will make his way up the Mall on horseback, the first time a monarch's done that since 1986.
And for that, the flags are out and the route ready, with thousands expected for another royal spectacle. Laura Bundock, Sky News.
And we'll be discussing some of those honours a bit later in the press preview. It is our first look at what is on tomorrow's front pages, and we'll be checking out the headlines tonight with Guardian columnist Zoe Williams, who's joined by the former Conservative MP turned Chief Executive of the charity Business in the Community, Mary McLeod. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. A very good evening to both of you. We shall chat in a moment after we've had a look at some of those front pages, certainly the ones that have arrived here at Sky. The Mirror leading with the King's first birthday honours list and says, unlike Boris Johnson's, these are truly deserved. Boris, it's a farce. Don't back me, reads the front of the Express, as it reports the former Prime Minister has urged his supporters to move on and not oppose the deranged Commons sanction. The Eye claims that high street banks are making billions during the cost of living crisis by increasing mortgages without passing on interest rates to savers. While The Guardian also looks to an expected surge in mortgages, which they say make the Tories a time bomb. And the Daily Mail reports that the first hosepipe ban of the year has been slapped on those living in Kent and Sussex. And don't forget, scan that QR code that you see on screen during the programme, and you'll be able to have a look at the front pages of the papers while you're watching us discussing them. And to do that, Guardian columnist Zoe Williams and former Conservative MP turned Chief Executive of the charity Business in the Community, Mary McLeod. A very good evening to both of you. A humid, warm evening, but good of you to go inside and speak to us tonight. Let's start with the eyes, shall we? It's miserable reading for the weekend, this, isn't it? UK mortgage rip-off. Banks pocketing billions by hiking up mortgages, but not doing the same, Zoe, for savings accounts.
The thing is, I mean, it's absolutely right to call banks out on behaviour like this, because it's like the shopkeeper who always shortchanges you. They're raising rates when it suits them and not raising rates when it doesn't suit them. The problem is that it doesn't get close to what an actual absolute catastrophe this is for the British consumer stroke homeowner stroke saver stroke citizen, right? Because even if they did hike savings rates, most people of working age do not have significant savings at the moment. So it wouldn't make a huge amount of difference, and it wouldn't do anything to mitigate the cost of living crisis. It wouldn't do anything to mitigate the mortgage crisis. So even while I kind of appreciate the eye calling for kind of fairness in these straitened times, it's still not going to touch the sides unless we either get permanently used to much higher interest rates, which will cause a housing crash if one isn't in train already, or I don't know, some hand of God comes in and redistributes the housing market. But the idea that banks could actually just, rebalance everything by putting an extra 2% on savings is fanciful.
Yeah, Mary, you know a lot about economics and how business works. Is it fair to say that the banks or the big lenders are exploiting customers?
Well, I mean, certainly on this, I mean, when people come out of fixed mortgage rates, which I think this is what this is looking at, and lots of people will be hugely worried about this as they finish their fixed rate mortgage term and they go on to a more variable rate. And therefore, they will be aligned to what the base rate is, set, of course, by the Bank of England. So banks need to respond to this. They don't have any control over what the base rate that the Bank of England sets, but they do have some, ability to adapt how they set their interest rates beyond that on mortgage and what they offer for mortgages. So, at a time of cost of living, and there's many businesses, including banks, who've been trying to help people during cost of living crisis. But this is one where, when they see this headline, I think hopefully it will give them time to reflect and try and do something different, because it really is important for people who will just end up defaulting on their mortgages, and then it just becomes an even worse crisis. So thinking has to be done now before that happens.
Yeah. So do you think there needs to be some sort of competition inquiry into all of this? Some MPs are asking for it.
Well, look, I mean, I'm really happy. Whenever there's kind of profiteering going on, I'm really happy to see it investigated. But the truth is, if you look at something like energy prices, for instance, and the unbelievable, astronomical profits that energy companies are making, which even against the backdrop of the war in Ukraine, the sanctions on Russian gas, even against that backdrop, their profits are unreasonable. And you can bet that when wholesale prices come down, your actual bills won't come down for some time after it. Now that I can completely see the justification for investigating, but mortgages they're pretty competitive. They track the Bank of England base rate, and they compete with each other to track it most closely. So if they could give you a mortgage under the base rate, then one of them would, and then another one of them would. What's going on here is that interest rates are being used as an attempt to keep inflation down. They're not working. The reason they're not working is actually manifold, but somebody at the Bank of England should take into account the fact that raising interest rates is not being effective at cutting inflation and stop raising interest rates.
Yeah, Mary, I mean, it's the same story on the front of The Guardian with obviously a slightly different take. Tory time bombers, millions face surge in mortgage rates. The 13th time that the interest rate is going to go up in a row next week. Now, clearly, the Tories hope that inflation is going to start coming down by the end of the year. But according to The Guardian, that's not necessarily going to be the case, and it's going to be a real issue as for the Conservatives as voters go to the polls.
Yeah, absolutely, and they've got a point here. I mean, UK Finance, who's the banking trade body, has warned about this, and the numbers of it's 2.4 million. They're saying fixed rate mortgages will expire in between now and the end of next year. So that's a lot of people affected by this. So therefore, it will come into the territory of general election time, and where the government people will look to them and say, what did you do about it? What have you done to try and resolve this at times of crisis? I mean, this reminds me of the 2008 financial crisis, where there's so many issues with individuals, the impact on individuals and entrepreneurs as well, small businesses, and some of the behaviours then in banking were held to account, and this is where customers, and Zoe is right there. I mean, it's customers can vote with their feet. And what we need is some banks to be really creative, innovative around now and say, no, actually, we're going to do things differently. We believe in supporting customers in hard times, and let's do things in a different way that will mean that they will see that they are valued as customers. And because it's much easier now to move around banks than before. So, yeah, it's customers need to input their, really decide and do something if they can.
Yeah. OK, let's move on to the front of the Mail. We're going to talk about their new star columnist. I wonder who it could be. It's not very clear, is it, from the front of the Mail? But the headline we're going to talk about before the break, hosepipe ban, Zoe. It's here already, and it's not even officially summer till next week.
I mean, it's really hard to see where the Daily Mail is going with the story, between talking about summer, talking about water companies, and talking about the kind of outrages perpetrated against the Great British Gardener. They seem to be trying to celebrate and be outraged at the same time, which I guess is their happy place. That's what they're into. For whatever the mismanagement of water companies, and we've had so many sewage stories recently, and so many stories about their failure to invest, their completely astronomical shareholder dividends, the fact that whichever way you cut it, the taxpayer always pays. All of that being said, if they've put a hose pipe ban in place, it's because there's a drought. So I personally find it a little bit difficult to get exercised about.
OK, let's see if Mary is exercised about the front of the Daily Express. The headline, Boris, it's a farce, don't back me. This is the announcement that Boris Johnson has told his supporters not to oppose the vote on Monday. He says it's time to turn the temperature down. What's his thinking here, Mary?
Well, I mean, I think the Privileges Committee in the House of Commons, the vote will be on Monday in the Commons on the report that they did. And the recent few days, there was lots of words going around about what would happen, and I think hopefully this might try and calm things down. I mean, at the end of the day, it is a committee that's set up, and if they didn't like the approach of the committee, then probably that should be done right at the start of it. But the former Prime Minister is now just trying to distance himself from this, I think, by also announcing the new job, which gives people something else to think about. But yes, the vote will go ahead on Monday. I think it's potentially a one-line whip, so I'm not sure how many will actually be there to vote, but I would imagine that the vote will probably go through to support the Privileges Committee, which has been set up for the reason of the scrutiny that they've done.
So, calling for his supporters to back down, I mean, he's not doing that as a kind gesture to Rishi Sunak, is he?
I mean, I think that the entire idea was silly, right? So when the Privileges Committee dropped their report on Thursday morning, there was that weird surge. Boris Johnson wrote 1,700 words in, frankly, columnist ease. It wasn't at all ex-prime ministerial. It didn't even really sound like a politician. He sounded like a columnist. And, you know, he made all kinds of weird slurs against members of the committee. He referred to the fact that Bernard Jenkins used to be a naturist. He called Harriet Harman rude names. I mean, he didn't even actually, now I think about it, write like a Telegraph columnist. He wrote more like a kind of, you know, an Express columnist. It was very intemperate, his language. I don't know whether he then asked his supporters to come out fighting on social media, telling other Tory MPs that if they didn't vote down the committee's report, that they could be deselected by their local constituency parties, or whether his hardcore of supporters are now so extreme and sort of cracked themselves that they just were doing that as on a kind of freelance basis. And there were, if you remember, only a handful of them. It was Jacob Rees-Mogg, it was Nadine Dorries, and it was like 3 other people. Even if there had been 50 Tory MPs saying we're backing Boris, we're going to vote against this report, they still wouldn't have had a hope of voting it down. They still wouldn't really have had a hope of forcing Rishi Sunak to call a general election. And they definitely wouldn't have had a hope of getting Boris into pole position in some other kind of guise so that he would be a realistic election prospect. So I think probably he's called the dogs off, but I'm not sure who called the dogs on.
Yeah, OK, that's a very interesting take on it. Well, you've mentioned the column, so go on, let's talk about it very quickly before the break. Mary, it's not about Partygate or honours or quitting as an MP. It's about losing weight.
Yes, and a very important thing, I must say too. I've spent my whole life on a diet. But yes, it's all about the 11:30 p.m. reading the fridge, which I must admit I do know something about. But yeah, he's probably trying to stay away from politics for at least this column and focus on something that actually a lot of people will sort of sympathise on, which is about weight. Except what they've done here is talk about the drug, the semaglutide drug, whether it's Saxenda, Wegovy, Ozempic, there's a range of them. He'd obviously seen 2 of his colleagues shed lots of pounds and wondered how they'd done it. But some GPs are giving prescriptions, but some aren't. So obviously Boris has someone that does. But it has been approved to be used. That's supposed to reduce your appetite. But I think Boris has gone back to exercise and willpower. So whether people are trying intermittent fasting, the 5-2 protein only, there's a whole range of things out there. At the end of the day, it's probably simple maths of reducing the bad stuff you put in and then getting as much exercise as possible. But yeah, these weight loss drugs, appetite suppressants, are available, but they're expensive behind the chemist counter.
Yeah, Zoe, I'm sure you've got lots to say about the column. I'm going to save it till look at you nodding. I'm going to save it till the next hour, if you don't mind. But thank you both for the moment. Coming up after the break, more of our press preview, including who has made it onto the King's first birthday honours list. Do stay with us.
I'm Katie Spencer and I'm Sky News' arts and entertainment correspondent. When you think of Glastonbury, it's mud you want and music. They're going to cross to us live in a minute. Okay. Thank you so much. Brad Pitt is now a prolific producer behind the scenes.
It's not a mystery to me. We always were capable of doing this.
Oh, they're wonderful children as an audience.
Who did that? Maverick here on the red carpet. I'm so excited, Tom Cruise. This is the story of the night.
It's the little independent film that could.
We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
nor have I ever struck any woman in my life.
There's this illusion of power.
Are you feeling well?
I remember covering the Oscars and that now infamous moment, the Will Smith slap. Nobody could quite believe that it had happened. You can tell from these crowds just how excited people are for the return of Pride.
These actors playing the lead roles were born long after the Sex Pistols broke up.
Are you pleased that you did say yes to the job?
I've never regretted it.
As a team, we've interviewed some of the biggest stars in the world. It can be incredibly surreal being swept up in their world, but we try to give you an honest sense of how these people really are.
Okay, I'll talk to you.
Don't leave me!
Yeah, okay.
There's no easy goodies. There's no easy baddies.
I've had a great time here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Welcome back. Part two of the press preview. Zoe and Mary are still with us. Zoe, the front page of the Mirror, My Heroes, King's first birthday honours list. The Mirror saying, unlike the gongs Boris Johnson lavished on Tory cronies and Partygate aides, today's awards are truly deserved. Just having a look at the list. The oldest recipient, Zoe, 106-year-old Joan Willett, who's raised money for the British Heart Foundation. The youngest, 18-year-old Junior J. Frood, getting the same honour for services to vulnerable children.
I mean, if this list had been designed to embarrass Boris Johnson, it couldn't have been more apropos. You know, it's in such stark contrast to what Johnson did. It's not. It doesn't kind of stick within its class. It doesn't reflect people who've done King Charles a favour, although I don't know what such a favour would look like. It shows a real kind of depth of research. It shows a real respect for civic duty of quite a modest kind. I mean, it sort of reminds you of what public life used to be like before the Conservatives went wild. I don't know. Maybe Mary will disagree with that.
Mary?
Well, I just think it's the unsung heroes, the community champions, the charities that have benefited from so many of volunteers who've done incredible things. And it is inspiring, the story is really inspiring. And what is lovely is that you have the 18-year-old and you've got the 106-year-old, which just shows that, anybody can change the country and change their community at any age, and they can absolutely make a difference to lives and transform what's going on in society around them. So we need to talk more about these stories, frankly, than the political honours, because these are so important to creating strong communities and a strong society. And I've seen so many of them in the work with business in the community. We get businesses to do more work in the community. And we've just come back from a day in Sheffield this week where, you know, we saw so many amazing organisations, but it's individuals who are leading those organisations and helping people, supporting people, and that's always the most vulnerable or the ones that are challenged, or it's a really great charity like the British Heart Foundation. And so it is about service and it's about that volunteering. So it's really good to have this, and I would encourage people to nominate. If you know someone who has done those sorts of things, do please nominate, which you can do via the Cabinet Office website. You can do it via your local Lord Lieutenant, or in London there's a Deputy Lord Lieutenant for each borough, but literally recommend people for those sorts of honours who have done amazing things, because they absolutely deserve it, and it inspires other people to do other things too that will transform lives and really help communities thrive.
Yeah, we should also say, of course, that some MPs have been honoured in the King's list. Long-serving Tory MPs, John Barron, Bob Blackman, both CBEs, Sir Ben Bradshaw, the Labour MP as well, who's served in Exeter for many years. OK, we've got lots more to discuss after the top of the hour, but for now, Mary and Zoe, thank you very much. They're staying with us for another hour or so. Right now,